it won't work because the geometry is going to have moved from there to here. So, these are basically static shots, static backgrounds, and, static background matte paintings are much easier. Well, not much easier, but they're generally going to they're simpler to deal with than projections. And so, even having to do, say looking at this one, 2 cams here, even having to do that one and then that one as 2 completely separate ones, it's still going to be quicker than A, UVing and doing traditional 3D backgrounds, but B, it's still relatively quick, and I'll kind of show you that with the texturing. I mean, that's something you always need to talk about in pre-production and weigh up the advantages and not of doing A, UVing, or B, projections, or C, just doing them static. I mean, usually it's all down to budget. And sometimes the director will want, he'll want to be able to do big 3D moves, or he'll want to be able to do something that you just can't even achieve with projections. So, then you'll have to do UVing. So it's always something that needs to be addressed right at the start of the production. Otherwise, you can get yourself into trouble. I mean, it's happened to me where, we've tried to achieve it with projections. We couldn't. So, we had to go back and basically do one scene in particular, UVing, and I had to kind of, unwrap the models so I could reproject the matte paintings properly and use displacement maps. And, any of you who do 3D would know, how painful that can be. And it's why matte painting and projections is such a big part of production, because it does make it all simpler and quicker. But sometimes, you can't achieve what the director wants. So, that again, just pre-production is the utmost importance dealing with this kind of stuff. Okay, so going back to this other concept, what I rendered was 2 cameras, camera A and camera B. There's the ID pass, and there's the beauty pass. So, as I said, these were just look 2 quick cameras off the model that is unfinished, but it's good enough to do something with. Now, I rendered a whole bunch of passes, and I just wanted to go into a bit more detail with them and talk about the uses that I did last week. Now, in Modo, another reason I love it is, so pass system is very simple to use. Basically, you add a render output and then choose what kind of pass, and these are all the options. Very similar to, I guess, the more simpler systems like V-Ray, and I don't know Cinema 4D, but I'm assuming that's quite simple from what I've been told. But basically, you choose the passes that you need, and then when you render, you can render out straight to a layered PSD file, and it labels all your passes into the various outputs. You can render OpenEXRs, etc., which is great for Nuke. Now, all in all, just much simpler than Mental Ray. Mental Ray is great now, and the pass system, is a lot simpler than it used to be, but it's still overly complex. Anyway, so I just want to show you, I guess, in more detail the passes I got out of this, and then quickly explain why or how I use them. So, the final color is basically what, it's a beauty pass, or I guess what it should look like without the passes split up. But say, starting at the bottom, you got shadow density, which is, I guess, your shadow areas. You can invert that, and that shows the shadow areas. There's illumination indirect. Now, there's 2 of these that are quite similar. So illumination indirect and diffuse indirect. So basically, I probably don't even need one of them. But say I'd take the diffuse indirect. Now, there's quite a few different types of diffuse shading in Modo, or in I guess in any renderer. But indirect is bounce light, and diffuse shading is light from the lights. So you can see the difference in the passes here. The diffuse, that's basically the lights coming from my directionals that are pointing down from the columns. And you've got a few over here. There's one here. These basic main ones. Then you've got the bounce. So coming from mainly because I don't have a floor at the back up here, which is something I need to address. But and then bounce coming kind of onto the columns. So if I then combine those, maybe I put that one on screen. It combines both those together. Now, one thing, when I've got this to this stage and I've got a renderer with all my different passes, what I want to do, generally, the compositors are hassling me for something, obviously the sooner they get something that's useful for them, they can start keying properly. Now, obviously, matte paintings to do all the really detailed edge keying need to be as finished as possible, but, at this stage, I can just quickly put all my passes together in the right order that I want them on the right composite layers and spit out a stand-in matte for compositing, and they can actually start keying. So it's always a good time to kind of play now and work out, what you're going to do, because obviously you can, put these on a soft light overlay, hard light, and get different effects, and so you may, dupe them and play around with them. But I mean, generally there are kind of standard ways you combine these together. So we've got direct and indirect. So they're the two diffuse passes. Ambient occlusion, everyone's favourite. Basically dirt shader or whatever you want to call it. Which is basically shadows in crevices. Any occluded areas from any ambient light, which generally goes in a multiply. And that, just helps kind of, helps give detail to areas, basically. And then obviously you can play with the levels on that, up and down. Sharpen it. Often I'll do a couple of variants of ambient occlusion. So that might now look like that. And depth. So depth is just a Z depth. I always use depth because, just apart from for depth of field, it's very useful for things like depth curving just for fog. So you invert it and then put it on a screen, for example. Reduce the opacity and just helps give distance, A nice little... And again, you could, adjust that to sharpen it or invert it, depending on what your needs are. So, that's just the main four I would use. And then as I mentioned, the IDs now, in Modo, you don't, as I think I mentioned, you had control of the ID. No, you don't, but there is two separate ones. So you've got a surface ID, which basically takes, your entire object, say that column, for example, and spits out as one color. And then you've got segment ID, which then takes individual faces. Now, it's just really handy for texturing. You get really quick selections off everything. And let me say right now, this is the only time I use Magic Wand tool. I just generally it's a horrible selection tool, but solid colors like this, it's fine. And I know, it has its uses, but generally, I'll use so many other methods for selecting, like channels, and I'll go through all that. But yeah, really handy, as I said. I mean, this one, is really good for correcting individual things. So say I wanted to take, there you go. Say I needed to correct that whole pole individually, that would give me that. But then if I wanted to take that panel there, bring that back, you can see it's just nice. Gives you nice quick selections. That's not perfect. I mean, you can see that should be split there. There should be 3 different ones, but it's just the way it is. You may need to do individual selections, but obviously it does save a lot of time. So that's that shot. The other one is pretty much the same. You may have diffuse direct, There's indirect. Yeah, that might go on screen. Let's try that on something else. Yeah, it's pretty nice on a hard light. It's pretty cool there. Yeah, ambient occlusion. It's going to make that very dark. I mean, God, you can